Good morning, students. In this session, we are going to discuss about dividend policy. The main objective of the financial management is to increase the market value of the shares. So how to increase the market value of the shares? Is there any relationship between the dividend policy and the market value of the shares? Whether dividend policy of the firm increases the market value of the share, whether dividend policy of the firm declines the market value of the shares, whether the dividend policy of the firm do not affect the market value of the share. These are the controversial and unresolved questions. In order to find out the answer for these questions, it is necessary to discuss the various aspects of dividend policy. So before that, we must know what is dividend. What do you mean by dividend? Dividend means it is a portion of the profit that is to be distributed to the equity shareholders. In other words, it is a part of the profit every investors, that means investors in the sense equity shareholders, are entitled to get at the end of the year. It is called as a dividend. Now, how the dividend is declared, after you see that EAT, operating profit, EBIT, from the EBIT we have to deduct interest on loans and advances, and then interest taxes to the government to be paid, followed by fixed amount of interest to be paid to the preferred shareholders. The rest of the amount is known as what? EAT. EAT, that is available to the equity shareholders. Now the board of directors, they will decide according to the dividend policy how much amount of dividend to be paid to the equity shareholders during the year. Sometimes the board of directors will decide to distribute the entire amount of the EAT as dividends to the equity shareholders. Sometimes part of the amount may be declared as dividend. The remaining part of the earnings, that means EAT, may be retained with the business itself in the form of reserve or reserve fund, general reserve, or accumulated profit, or whatever it may be. That will be shown in the liability side of the balance sheet. Right? And sometimes instead of declaring the entire amount of dividend, entire amount of profit as a dividend, or part of the profit as dividend, suppose if it is a newly established firm, the directors will decide to retain the entire amount of EAT with itself in the form of general reserve or reserve fund instead of declaring dividend. Because this is one of the most important internal sources of funds which would be utilized at no cost. But if the amount that is received from the outsiders, then the firm has to pay cost. Suppose if the firm which receives capital by way of issuing equity shares or preferences, it has to give what? Cost. It has to give dividend. It has to spend some amount for getting that amount from the equity shares or equity shareholders, or from the persons who want to buy what? Preference shareholders. Suppose if the firm which receives fund from the outsiders by selling off its debentures or bonds, the firm has to pay interest. So these are what? External sources of funds. It incurs cost. So the cost of capital may be high compared with the firm which is using the internal sources of funds like what? Reserve fund, general reserve, or accumulated profit, etc. So that if it is a newly established firm, the firm will decide to retain the entire amount of EAT for utilizing the fund internally for the purpose of its expansion or modernizing its business. Okay, now what are the different types of dividend? What are the different types of dividend? Now, first one is regular dividend. Regular dividend means what? Usually, generally, the firm will declare dividend at the end of the year. The firm, whether it is a newly established firm or it is old age firms, whatever it may be, it will declare, these firms will declare dividend after conducting what you call the annual general meeting. Okay. Then the board of directors, they will fix the dividend. They will propose a certain amount of dividend out of the earnings to be declared as dividends to the shareholders. But the proposed dividend will be approved by the shareholders at the annual general meeting. Only after approval of the shareholders, after approval of the shareholders, the dividend will be declared to the shareholders. Right? Okay. So this is usually taking place. This type of dividend procedure will be taking place usually. This type of dividend is to be called as regular dividend. So next one is interim dividend. What is the meaning of interim dividend? When the firm which is gaining higher amount of profit, enormous amount of profit, the firm will declare interim dividend. Interim dividend here refers the dividend to be paid to the equity shareholders in between the two annual general meeting. Okay, you see that before a declaration of interim dividend, definitely the board of directors should have deducted the dividend on fixed assets during the year. Only after deduction of depreciation on fixed assets, the rest of the amount may be declared as interim dividend. Now, you may ask a question, what is it? Sir, whether after declaration of interim dividend, whether regular dividend will be paid? Definitely. At the end of the annual general meeting, as usual, the regular dividend will be paid, will be distributed to the equity shareholders. But anyhow, it is, you have to remember that the interim dividend will be paid in between the two annual general meeting. Okay. Next, stock dividend. What is the meaning of stock dividend? You might have seen in the business, in the balance sheet of a business organization. What is it in the liability side of the balance sheet? There are general reserve fund, retained earnings, accumulated profit, or profit and loss account. So there are various names are there. So what are these? These are the reserve fund, right? This would have been kept to the business. These profits would have been accumulated for the past 5 years or 10 years out of the earnings. Actually, whose amount is this? This is the amount of equity shareholders. Actually, this amount should have been distributed previously to the equity shareholders as a dividend, but the firm didn't do that one because it requires funds for what? For the purpose of meeting its requirements. Requirements in the sense what financial requirements. For what? For the purpose of expanding business, for the purpose of starting a new branches, for the purpose of starting a new project. It requires funds, so that funds will be taken from the reserve fund or general reserve. In what way? The reserve fund or general reserve, that should be capitalized. Capitalized in the sense what? All the reserve fund, general reserve, accumulated profit, that will be converted into capital, equity capital, that will be distributed, that will be divided into small units. That small unit is to be known as what equity shares. that equity shares are now to be termed as what bonus shares. That bonus shares will be distributed to the existing shareholders proportionately. Right now, the reserve fund or general reserve that has been capitalized, that amount of capital will be utilized for business expansion or business purpose, or for the purpose of starting a new project, whatever it may be. So this is what stock dividend, because stock here means what? Shares, equity shares is to be called as what? Stock. That stock, bonus stock, that means what? Bonus shares that will be distributed as dividends to the equity shareholders. This is what the stock dividend. Next one is, cash dividend. Cash dividend means what? Generally the firm will declare cash as a dividend. But the firm which is having the liquidity, which is having sufficient amount of liquidity position, immediately out of the profit, the firm will declare dividend in the form of cash, not in any other form, not in the form of stock, not in the form of what? Bond, etc., etc. Okay, it will declare cash. Generally, most of the firms in India will declare a dividend only in the form of cash, not any other form. Right? When the cash dividend will be declared, when the firm which is satisfied with sufficient amount of cash position in the business itself. Okay, so this is what the cash dividend. Another one is, bond dividend. So what is the meaning of bond dividend? Bond here means what? Debentures. Instead of declaring dividend in the form of cash or in the form of stock, sometimes the firm will issue debentures as dividend to the existing equity shareholders. So that debentures that will be taken back by the company after the certain period is over. Till that period, the firm will pay interest on debentures. This is nothing but the payment of dividend will be the payment of dividend is postponed. You see that after the certain period is over, all the debentures will be taken back by the company. Instead, the firm will pay cash for the cash for the debentures to the equity shareholders. Okay, next, property dividend. Sometimes the firm do not require certain assets of the business. Some assets are no longer required to use in the business. So that time, what the company is doing, what the firm is doing, the firm is declaring dividend. That means the property, that asset, that will be distributed as dividends to the shareholders. Instead of making the dividend in the form of cash or in the form of stock or in the form of bond, the company's property, the company's asset, that will be distributed as dividends to the shareholders. This is what property dividend, but such property dividend is not permitted to be distributed in India. In India, stock dividend, property dividend are not permitted to be distributed to the equity shareholders. In India, only the cash dividend. Under some circumstances, the firms in India are permitted to issue bonuses to the existing shareholders as a dividend. Okay, so these are all what different types of dividend. Okay. Next, definitions of dividend policy. Two authors who have defined a dividend policy of this Western Brigham, who has defined dividend policy. Dividend policy determines the division of earnings between payments to shareholders and retained earnings. What's the meaning of this definition? Dividend policy that determines the division of earnings between payments to shareholders and retained earnings. So what does it mean? The earnings, EAT, earnings after tax, EAT, that is to be divided into two parts. One part that is to be retained with the business, and another part that should be distributed as dividends to the shareholders. For that, a policy has to be formulated by the financial experts or the board of directors of the company, which is known as what? Dividend policy, according to Weston and Brigham. Okay. Next, Gitman. The firm's dividend policy represents a plan of action to be followed whenever the dividend decision must be made, has to be made. So what is the meaning of the definition given by Gitman? So that is, dividend policy is the plan of action that should be implemented, that should be executed whenever the dividend decision is taken. Whenever the dividend decision is taken. Okay. So these are all the two important definitions that is to be given by the important authors, well-known authors, Weston, Brigham and Gitman. Right. Next, objectives of dividend policy. What are the objectives of dividend policy? Number one, providing sufficient financing. So what does it mean? Sufficient financing to whom? The finances should be sufficiently provided. The EAT is there, earnings after tax. You see, as I already told, when the firm which is in need of finance for the purpose of its business expansion or modernization or for starting a new business, it has to sufficiently retain the EAT with the business in the form of reserve or general reserve or accumulated profit, because these internal sources of finance that will be very useful for the business expansion in future. It is called as a reinvestment of profit or plowing back of profits. Next, return to shareholders. At the same time, the second objective is return to shareholders, because shareholders are the investors. They are expecting to get the nominal amount of return every year, reasonable amount of return every year, because every investors who are interested to get the reasonable amount of return every year. So that at the time of framing the dividend policy, the board of directors have to see whether to, declare higher amount of dividend, reasonable amount of dividend or not to the existing shareholders. Reasonable amount of dividend in the sense for their investment, the reasonable rate of return should be made to the existing shareholders, equity shareholders. Next, wealth maximization. Wealth maximization in the sense, at the time of framing the dividend policy, the financial experts or the board of directors who are going to define dividend policy for the firm has to consider the wealth maximization. So this is the third objective of the of the dividend policy. So what is wealth maximization? Wealth maximization is nothing but the value of the firm has to be increased. The value of the firm has to be increased. So that the firm and the directors, they have to focus their attention in maximizing the value of the firm in future. For that, what they have to do, instead of declaring higher amount of dividend to the equity shareholders, they have to maximum retain the EAT, the business itself, in order to making future investment of the business, future investment in the business. So these are all the three objectives of dividend policy. Next, what are the types of dividend policy? The first one is stable dividend policy. What is a stable dividend policy? Stable dividend policy, stability in distributing dividend, stability of dividend or consistency of dividend, or what do you call that? No fluctuation in declaring dividend. No fluctuation in declaring dividend. That means what? Stable dividend policy. So every firm has to chalk out the stable dividend policy of the firm. There are three types of stable dividend policy. One is constant dividend per share. So what is the meaning of constant dividend per share? Whatever be the EAT, correct, whatever be the earnings after taxes that is available to the equity shareholders, the firm has to declare constant dividend to the equity shareholders every year. Constant dividend. For example, the firm has decided to declare ₹2 per share as a dividend for every year for the 10 rupees face value of the share. A shareholder who has 10,000, the 100 shares, the face value of the share is ₹10. He is entitled to get ₹2 per share every year for over a period of time. For example, for a period of 5 years or 6 years. After that, the profit of the organization may increase. So that time, from ₹2 to ₹3 may be given as a dividends to the equity shareholders for certain period, for certain years. That means for a period of 5 years or 10 years as it is. Okay. Then after that, after a certain period is over, again the profitability of the organization may go up, or that time the firm may increase the dividend from 3 to 4 rupees for 5 years or 6 years like that. So this is what a stable dividend, a constant dividend per share. Next, constant payout ratio. Constant payout ratio. For example, constant payout ratio means what? The EAT of the organization, EAT of the company is, for example, EAT, earning per share, EPS, earning per share of the firm is rupees 10. Okay. So what is the constant payout? But the payout should be, for example, 30%. 30% in the sense ₹3 per share. When the EPS is 10, the dividend to be paid out to the equity shareholder is ₹3 because 30% payout ratio. Right? Suppose in the next year, the the EPS that has increased to ₹15. What is the payout? 30%. 30% on 15 rupees is equal to 4 rupees and 50 paise. So next year the dividend would be ₹4 and 50 paise. So after 2 years, in the third year, the EPS that has increased 2 rupees, 20 rupees, increase it to ₹20. What will be the payout? 30%. That is the payout 30%. The sense what will be the dividend per share? That is 6 rupees. That means 30% on 20 rupees. That comes to ₹6 rupees. Again, the EPS that comes down to ₹12 in the fourth year. What will be the dividend per share? 30% on 12, that means the 3 rupees and 60 paise. 30% on rupees 12. 12 is the EPS. 30% is the payout. So 30% on rupees 12, that comes to rupees 3 and 60 paise. So this is what constant, constant payout ratio. Okay, next, stable rupee dividend plus extra dividend. Stable rupee dividend plus extra dividend. What does it mean? So the firm has decided, the firm has framed to pay rupees 3 per share every year for the 10 rupees face value of share. It has been defined in the dividend policy. So this is a stable. Whatever be the profit, this is a stable. Even if the profit is low, rupees 3 should be paid. If the profit is high, rupees 3 should be paid. That is stable. But under some circumstances, in a particular year, the profit of the organization that is enormously increasing. So that time, what the company can do, the company can pay stable dividend plus extra dividend of dividend. For example, extra dividend of rupees 2 or rupees 3. This is when the firm which is earning higher amount of higher amount of profit. So the regular dividend, stable dividend of rupees 3 plus extra dividend of rupees 2, so rupees 5 will be paid during the year. So this is called as what? Stable rupee dividend plus extra dividend. So these are all the three types of dividend policy. Okay, right. Next, determinants of dividend policy or factors influencing dividend policy. So what are the factors that will determine the dividend policy? What type of dividend policy should be formulated? So that we will discuss now. The first factor is nature of earnings. Generally, the industrial organization which will receive stable income, stable earnings. So the type of industrial units may formulate stable dividend policies. But some organizations, business organizations, which will deal with the necessary goods for the daily life of the people, which will gain higher amount of income, stable income, but at the same time higher amount of income. So for that type of organization, high dividend policy with stable high dividend policy or stable dividend policy may be formulated. Apart from this, some of the firms which will be dealing with the luxurious items. So for that firms, what type of dividend policy has to be formulated? That is, low dividend policy has to be formulated. Low dividend policy has to be formulated. So the dividend policies to be formulated here are fully depending upon the nature of business and the nature of earnings. Okay, next, the age of the company. Age of the company is another determinant of dividend policy. Suppose if it is a newly established company, for the first 5 or 6 years, the company will not declare any dividend to the shareholders, because it is a growing company. The earnings available in the first 5 to 6 years have to be reinvested with the business in order to develop the business activities, so that it won't be declaring dividend for the first 5 to 6 years. After that, it may define or it may formulate dividend policy, maybe the low dividend policy, for the next 5 to 6 years, because high dividend policy is not possible. Only the low dividend policy, the minimum amount of dividend to be paid to the shareholders or to the investors of the companies. Then some of because the reason is, it is a growing company, newly established company. But if it is an existing company, it has been started 10 years before. So the type of company that has been fully developed, fully grown company, so that companies may declare what you call that stable dividend or even higher amount of dividend, so that stable dividend policy may be formulated. For which company? The company that has already been established, it is an existing company, just it has been started 10 years back or more. So this is what the framing dividend policy is fully depending upon the age of the company also. And the next one is liquidity position of the company. Then what is liquidity? The firm which is having the liquid position, that means current assets, like what cash on hand, cash in bank, so like that. The most liquid assets, it is having enormous amount of most liquid assets the business has at present in its hand. So that type of existing companies, old companies can declare immediately the cash dividend. That's no doubt at all. Whenever the company which is having high liquidity position, that time the company can declare higher amount or declare dividend, cash dividend. Suppose if the liquidity position is not satisfied, then what the company can do? Higher amount of cash dividend is not possible. Only the bond dividend, stock dividend or bond dividend are possible. At present in India, the stock dividend is permitted, so that the company can issue what you call that bonus shares to the shareholders proportionately. So in accordance with that, you see that the company board of directors or financial experts how to formulate what you call that dividend policies. Okay, next another one is equity shareholders preference for current income. Equity shareholders preference for current income. So suppose if the categories of the equity shareholders, some of the investors who may be willing to receive regular income for their investment. Some of the shareholders who may be willing to raise their wealth of the organization, to maximize their wealth of the organization, right? So that is the dividend policy to be formulated in that company is fully depending upon the nature of shareholders. If maximum number of shareholders are willing to receive regular income for their investment, definitely the board of directors, they are going to formulate dividend policy by which a regular dividend, that means a stable amount of dividend to be paid to the equity shareholders. In accordance with that, the dividend policy should be formulated. Suppose if the company in which there are maximum number of shareholders who are willing to maximize their organization, wealth of their organization, that shareholders, instead of declaring higher dividend every year, what they can do, they can retain the earnings with the business, and that retained earnings may be reinvested in the business in order to maximize its wealth of the organization, in order to maximize the market value of the shares. So this is fully depending upon the nature of shareholders. Right. Okay, next factor is requirements of institutional investors. Requirements of institutional investors. Who are the institutional investors? That is Life Insurance Corporation of India, then GIC, General Insurance Corporations, and other private insurance corporations. They are all willing to invest their earnings in the company's shares. What type of company shares they prefer? The institutional investors. What type of company shares the institutional investors will prefer? They will prefer only those companies which are declaring stable amount of dividend to the shareholders. So that the investors, institutional investors who would like to invest their amount in the company which are providing a stable dividend. Those companies which have formulated stable dividend policy, in which the institutional investors will prefer to invest their amount. So that stable dividend policy should be preferred by the institutional investors for their investment, for making their investment in such companies. And then another one is legal rules. What is the legal rules? The legal rules is also one of the factor which will determine the formulation of dividend policy. So what is that? The first one is capital impairment rule. So at the time of defining the dividend policy, the board of directors or the financial experts who are defining or who are formulating the dividend policy have to strictly follow the capital impairment rule. So what does it mean? The company should declare dividend only out of the current year profit, not from the capital of the company. When a company which follows a stable dividend policy, if any particular year, the dividend is not enough, the profit is not enough to declare dividend, that company cannot take any amount from the capital of the company. Right? And another rule is net profit. This rule is also very important. It should be considered at the time of formulating dividend policy. What is that? According to section 205 of the Companies Act of 1956, that every company has to declare dividend only out of the current year profit. Suppose if the current year profit is not enough to declare dividend, even the past year's profit can also be utilized. But before declaring dividend, definitely it should be kept in mind that the current year depreciation should be deducted from the profit, past year's profit, or from the current year profit, right? Or then only that company is permitted to declare dividend. Then, but at present, the government of India has been permitted. The government of India has been empowered to allow the companies which is not having enough the profit, enough earnings to declare stable amount of dividend, that company can also take retained earnings, even without providing the depreciation during the year. The retained earnings and current year profit may collectively or declared as dividends to the shareholders. So that provision is given, but one restriction is there. What is that? If there were any losses in the previous year, that losses might have been carried forward only after the loss is set off. Only after the loss is set off, the remaining profit that will be declared as dividends to the shareholders. The company is not allowed to declare any dividend without setting up of previous year losses, so that the previous year losses should be set off before declaring any dividends to the shareholders of the company. Okay. Next, insolvency rule. Which company, what is insolvency rule? So you see that the company's balance sheet, you know that they mean asset side and liability side. If the total of the asset side, if the total of the liability side is exceeding the total of the asset side, it refers for the company is declared, the company is in insolvent position, That is number one. Number two, if the company is not in a position to pay off the present or current creditors, the company is considered as an insolvent. So under these two circumstances, the company is not permitted to declare any dividends to the shareholders in order to protect the creditors of the company. Right? Okay, once again I will tell you, insolvency means what? If the company's liability side of the balance sheet, if the company's total of liability side of the balance sheet is exceeding the total of the asset side of the balance sheet, it means what? The company that is considered as an insolvent. Number one. Number two, if the company is not in a position to pay off the current creditors, it means what? The company can be declared as an insolvent. Under these two circumstances, the company is not permitted to pay off or to declare dividend to the shareholders of the company in order to protect the creditors. Okay. Next, contractual requirements. So what is the contractual requirements? The dividend to be paid should never exceed 10% of the face value at any time. That is number one. Number two, ceiling should be defined in terms of net profits. That ceiling should be not exceeding 50%. Not exceeding 15% means what? That means declaration of dividend, the amount of dividend should be not exceeding 50% of the net profit. Number three, minimum earnings to be retained. You see that minimum profit or minimum earnings should be retained with the business in the form of reserve or reserve fund. That is very, very important. So these three things should be kept in mind at the time of formulating what you call that dividend policy. What is that? Number one, dividend should be the amount of dividend to each shareholder should not be exceeding 10% of the face value, and ceiling in terms of net profits that should be not exceeding 50%. That means 50% of the total amount of dividend to be declared should be not exceeding 50% of the net profit. And the third one is minimum earnings should be maintained. Minimum earnings should be retained with the business in the form of general reserve or reserve fund. So these three things should be kept in mind by the financial experts at the time of formulating dividend policy. Next, financial needs of the company. So financial needs of the company. So whenever the company which is in need of finance for its future expansion of the business or future project definitely the company has to retain the profits, retain maximum profits in the business itself. Then suppose if it is a highly developed company or a well-known company the company that has already grown up, the company need not maintain any retained earnings of the business. It can declare a stable amount of dividend or even higher amount of dividend. In accordance with that, the company experts have to formulate dividend policy. Next, access to capital markets. So what is the meaning of access to capital markets? What is capital market? Capital market is a market where long-term funds are being lent to the companies, to the business organizations. Suppose if the company prefers to get financial assistance from the capital market, then the company need not keep any retained earnings of the business. The company can declare a dividend, stable dividend or even higher dividend when the company which is earning higher amount of profit. Suppose if the company there is no access of capital markets and getting financial assistance, that time definitely the company has to retain higher amount of profit with the company itself, because that amount will be very useful in future for the investment, for the business expansion, because the company, there is no access to the company to get financial assistance from the capital market. So that is the reason why the company will be in a position to use the retained earnings for the investment in future. Right. Next, control objective. So what is the meaning of control objective? Control objective means what? You see, if whenever you see that generally the board of directors, the existing shareholders do not like to lose their control, because when they will lose their control, they will lose the control when additional equity shares are issued, because the control is diluted. The control is diluted when additional equity shares are issued to the public. Why? When the additional shares will be issued, whenever the company which is in need of money for its further investment in a business. Then how? Because there is no, you see that if there is no retained earnings, if there is no general reserve or reserve fund or accumulated profit, then what the company will do? There is no internal sources of finance. The company will definitely depending upon the external sources of finance, so that the company will definitely issue shares to the public for mobilizing capital. So that time the control that is diluted to the additional equity shareholders, among the additional equity shareholders. So then, in order to control the company, in order to keep the control with the existing shareholders and the directors of the company, it is better to the company to maintain retained earnings that will restrict an issuing of additional equity shares to the public. The retained earnings will be used for further investment in future for business expansion and modernization. Okay. Then dividend inflation. So what is the inflation? Inflation means what? Too much of money is chasing too few goods. Then during the inflation period, the prices of the goods and services will be high. Then you see that generally the company, our Indian accounting system is following the historical cost. According to the historical cost, we are providing depreciation on fixed assets for the purpose of replacement of the fixed assets in future. But in future, when when there is inflation, the replacement cost will be higher than the historical cost. So that time the cost for purchasing of machinery is not enough. So that what the company has to do, the company has to declare minimum rate of minimum amount of dividend to the existing to the shareholders. The remaining amount will be retained with the business, because in order to replace the machineries, in order to replace the fixed assets, if the historical cost is not enough to replace the machineries, the time the retained earnings will be taken for purchasing the machine or purchasing the fixed asset. So this is another factor. In accordance with that, the dividend policy has to be formulated. Next, dividend policy of the competitors. See that generally at the time of formulating dividend policy, the firm has to see what type of dividend policy has been formulated by other rival firms in the other rival firms, because generally the investors, what they will be doing, if the firm's market value of the share is decreasing, they will immediately return sell their shares and immediately they will go for rival company shares. They will try to invest their amount in the rival company shares. They are interested to get the regular income from the companies. Who are they? That means investors. The investors who are interested to get a regular income in the form of dividend from the companies where they have invested, and at the same time the market value of the shares should also be increased, should also be high. They will look at these two things. Suppose if the firm is not in a position to increase the market value of the shares, is not in a position to declare a stable amount of dividend, that time automatically the investors in our company will sell the shares and they will go for other rival company shares in where they would like to invest. So in order to retain the investors in our company, the company financial experts at the time of formulating dividend policy, they have to formulate appropriate dividend policy for our companies. Next, past dividend rates of the companies. The dividend policy, past dividend rates. So this is also a very important factor. At the time of formulating dividend policy, the past rates of the dividends should also be kept in mind. The reason is, for the past 10 years, the dividend rate is very high. 10 years back it was 10%, later on 12%, later on 13%, then 14%. There was an increasing trend of dividend during the last 10 years. Suppose in the year, suppose if the dividend that is decreasing from 10% to 9% or 8% due to insufficient net profit, so what will happen? Automatically the investors who will be losing interest on our company, so they will sell the shares and they will go for investing their amount in some other company shares. In order to retain the investors in our company, then cash should be taken at the time of formulating dividend policy. And in addition to that, the last one is other factors. What are the other factors? Corporate taxation, attitude of investors, then the government rules, government policies. So these are all the factors which will also affect the dividend policy of a business organization. So that at the time of formulating the dividend policy, the board of directors, they have to consider these factors also. So with this, the four factors influencing the dividend policy is over. Next, theories of dividend policy and problems, that we will be discussing in the second part of the session. Okay, thank you.